Welcome back to the British Accent Podcast. I'm Emily, and today we're diving into something that many learners don't even realize is important: cultural mistakes when speaking English. You see, it's not just about grammar and vocabulary. Sometimes, the way you use English can create misunderstandings if you're not aware of cultural differences.
Absolutely. And it's one of those things that learners often don't think about until it happens. For example, you might say something that sounds perfectly fine in your native language, but in English, it can come across as rude, too direct, or even confusing. That doesn't mean you're doing something wrong on purpose, it just means there are hidden cultural rules that go along with the language.
One big area is politeness. In English, especially in British culture, people often use softening words like maybe, perhaps, or I was wondering if, instead of being too direct. For instance, saying close the window sounds like an order. But if you say, could you close the window, please, it feels polite and natural. Learners sometimes forget these little words, and the sentence ends up sounding too strong.
Exactly. Another common mistake is with personal questions. In some cultures, it's normal to ask about salary, age, or even weight as part of casual conversation. But in English-speaking cultures, especially in the UK or US, those questions can feel too personal or even impolite. Instead, small talk about the weather, hobbies, or weekend plans is much safer and more natural.
Yes, and greetings too. For example, in some countries, people might go straight to "have you eaten" as a greeting. In English, that could confuse someone. Instead, it's usually "how are you?" or "how's it going?" Even if the person doesn't actually want a long answer, it's a cultural way to start a conversation.
And let's not forget humor. English speakers, especially Brits, use a lot of sarcasm and irony. If you take everything literally, you might feel confused or even offended. But understanding that it's just humor can save you from misinterpreting what's being said.
Another subtle mistake is interrupting. In some cultures, interrupting shows enthusiasm. But in English, it can feel like you're cutting someone off. The polite way is to wait for a pause, or say something like, "Sorry, can I just add something," before jumping in.
That's such an important point. Communication isn't just about words, it's about respect and awareness of how people interact. And if learners pay attention to these cultural details, their English will feel much more natural, and they'll avoid awkward moments.
Let's give another example that happens a lot with learners: using first names. In English-speaking countries, especially in the UK or US, people often switch to first names very quickly, even with teachers or colleagues. But in some cultures, using someone's first name without a title feels disrespectful. On the other hand, if you always say Mr. or Mrs. to everyone in English, it might sound too formal or distant. The key is noticing how the other person introduces themselves. If they say, "Hi, I'm Sarah," it's fine to call them Sarah.
That's a good one. And speaking of introductions, another cultural mistake is shaking hands, or not shaking hands. In English-speaking countries, a handshake is often expected in formal situations, like business meetings. But you wouldn't usually go for a hug or kiss on the cheek, unless you know the person really well. So if you try that, it might surprise someone. Similarly, not shaking hands at all in a formal setting could seem rude, even if that's normal where you're from.
Yes, body language in general can be tricky. Eye contact, for example. In many English-speaking cultures, making eye contact shows confidence and honesty. If you avoid eye contact completely, it can make people think you're not interested or hiding something. But of course, in some cultures, too much eye contact is considered rude. So learners need to find a balance when speaking English.
And let's not forget the tone of voice. Sometimes learners translate directly from their language, and the intonation can sound flat or even angry. In English, tone plays a big role in politeness. For instance, raising your voice slightly at the end of "could you help me" makes it sound like a genuine question. If you say it with a flat tone, it might sound like a demand.
That ties into another cultural mistake, not saying please and thank you enough. In English, we use those words a lot more than in some other languages. Even in simple situations, like giving money to a cashier or asking for directions, leaving out please or thank you can make your sentence sound abrupt.
Exactly. And actually, saying sorry is another one. In British culture, people apologize very often, even when it's not really their fault. For example, if someone bumps into you, you might still say sorry. Learners sometimes think that's strange, but it's part of the culture. Not using sorry in those small moments can make you seem less polite, even though you don't mean it that way.
Let's move on to another interesting one, directness. In some cultures, being very direct can be considered rude, but in English-speaking countries, especially in places like the US or the UK, direct communication is often appreciated. If you want something, it's better to say it clearly rather than hinting at it. For example, if you're at a restaurant and you don't like your food, you can politely say, "Excuse me, I'm sorry, but this isn't what I ordered. Could I please have the correct dish?" That's direct, but still polite.
Yes, and if you just sit there quietly and don't say anything, people won't know what's wrong. So being too indirect can actually cause confusion. Another cultural mistake is using humor without being careful. Humor can be a great way to connect with people, but jokes don't always translate well across cultures. A joke that's funny in your language might not make sense in English, or it might even sound offensive without you realizing it.
That's true. And also, sarcasm is very common in English, especially in the UK. If someone says something like, "Oh, great, it's raining again," they probably don't mean it's great. They are being sarcastic. But if you try to use sarcasm before you fully understand how it works in English, you might sound confusing or even rude.
Another one I want to mention is interrupting. In some cultures, interrupting during a conversation shows you're engaged and interested, but in English-speaking countries, it's usually seen as impolite unless it's done in a very subtle way. So if you want to add something, you can wait for a pause or say, "Oh, sorry, can I just add something here?" That way you join in without sounding like you're cutting someone off.
Good point. And let's not forget about cultural differences with compliments. In English, if someone compliments you, the natural response is to say, "Thank you." But in some cultures, people might reject compliments or downplay them. For example, if someone says, "Your English is really good," and you reply, No, it's terrible," it might make the person feel awkward. In English culture, a simple "thank you" is enough.
Yes, I've seen that many times. People think they are being humble, but it actually sounds like they are rejecting kindness. So accepting compliments is definitely an important cultural skill in English conversations.
Another subtle mistake is body language. For example, in many English-speaking countries, eye contact is seen as a sign of confidence and honesty. If you avoid eye contact completely, people might think you're nervous, or even hiding something. But on the other hand, staring too much can make someone uncomfortable. So it's about balance, showing that you're engaged without making the other person feel awkward.
Exactly. And the same goes for personal space. In some cultures, people stand very close when talking, but in English-speaking countries, especially in the US or UK, people usually prefer a little more distance, maybe an arm's length. If you stand too close, it might make them feel uncomfortable.
Another cultural difference is how we talk about money, age, or personal details. In some places, asking questions like "How old are you?" or "How much do you earn?" is normal, but in English-speaking cultures, those questions are considered very personal and sometimes even rude. So it's safer to avoid asking about money, religion, or politics unless you really know the person well.
Yes, that's a big one. And one last thing I'd add is about saying no. In some cultures, saying no directly is avoided, but in English it's okay to say it clearly, as long as you're polite. For example, if someone invites you out and you can't go, you can just say, "I'm sorry, I can't make it tonight, but thank you for inviting me." That's direct but still respectful.
Great point. So overall, avoiding cultural mistakes isn't about memorizing a long list of rules. It's about being aware of how English speakers usually communicate, and adjusting little by little. That way, your English will not only be grammatically correct, but also culturally natural.
Here's another example that surprises a lot of learners: tone of voice. In some cultures, speaking loudly shows enthusiasm, but in many English-speaking countries, it might come across as rude or aggressive. On the other hand, speaking too softly can make people think you're unsure or lacking confidence. So paying attention to your tone and volume is just as important as the words you choose.
Yes, and that connects to humor too. Humor doesn't always translate well across cultures. For instance, sarcasm is very common in English, especially in British English, but it can be confusing or even offensive if you don't recognize it. You might hear someone say, "Oh, great weather we're having, on a rainy day," that's sarcasm. Understanding when people are joking helps you avoid taking things too literally.
Exactly, and let's not forget politeness markers. In English, we use please, thank you, and sorry very often. Some learners think it's too much, but it's actually part of sounding polite. For example, instead of saying, "Give me water," we'd say, "Could I have some water, please?" It makes a big difference in how people perceive you.
And even small responses matter. If someone says thank you, it's expected you'll reply with "You're welcome," or "No problem." Staying silent might feel normal in some cultures, but in English it can seem a bit cold or unfriendly.
So what we're really saying is this: communication in English is about more than vocabulary and grammar. It's about showing respect for the culture, paying attention to tone, and understanding unspoken social rules. That's what makes your English feel natural and help you build good relationships.
Another cultural point that many learners overlook is personal space. In some cultures, it's normal to stand very close when talking, but in English-speaking countries, people often prefer a bit of distance. If you stand too close, it might make them uncomfortable, even if your words are polite.
Yes, and gestures too. For example, the thumbs up sign usually means good or okay in English-speaking countries, but in other places it can be offensive. So it's always a good idea to learn which gestures are safe to use internationally and which ones might cause misunderstandings.
Also, think about eye contact. In many English-speaking cultures, making eye contact shows confidence and honesty. But if you avoid eye contact completely, people might think you're hiding something or not paying attention. Of course, you don't need to stare, but balancing eye contact is important for natural communication.
That's such an important point, Emily. At the end of the day, learning English isn't just about vocabulary or grammar, it's about connecting with people, and culture is a huge part of that connection. If you're aware of small details like tone, body language, politeness, and timing, you'll avoid misunderstandings and build stronger relationships.
All of these examples show how language and culture go hand in hand. If you speak perfect grammar, but ignore cultural rules, people might still feel a barrier. But if you combine good English with cultural awareness, you'll connect with people much more smoothly.
That's such an important point, Emily. At the end of the day, learning English isn't just about vocabulary or grammar, it's about connecting with people, and culture is a huge part of that connection. If you're aware of small details like tone, body language, politeness, and timing, you'll avoid misunderstandings and build stronger relationships.
Exactly. And don't feel pressured to be perfect. Everyone makes small mistakes, even native speakers, and most people are forgiving. What matters is your willingness to learn and adjust. Every time you notice a cultural difference and adapt to it, you're improving not only your English, but also your ability to communicate across cultures.
So, as you continue your English journey, remember, words matter, but so do the unspoken rules. The more you pay attention to both, the more natural and confident you'll feel when speaking with people from around the world.
We hope this episode gave you some insights you can use right away. Thanks for joining us, and keep practicing with curiosity and an open mind. You're doing great, and with every conversation, you're getting closer to true fluency.